Imagine a brother who, instead of a blade, severed the tie of kinship with a chilling proposal. He didn't wield a weapon, yet he cut the bond of blood with a cold suggestion. Let's sell him. He wasn't the eldest, nor the favored son, merely one amongst 12, shadowed by envy, silence, and missteps. Following that fateful day, he fell into a profound quietude. He witnessed his father's uncontrollable weeping, heard the echoes of the past lamenting from the fields, and remained utterly silent. He attempted to forge a new existence, relocating to a different territory, entering into matrimony, but remorse accompanied him, and for years, the specter of that event closely pursued him. Then, a transformation occurred. The very lips that had once orchestrated the sale now offered their own life in exchange for his younger sibling. The betrayer assumed the role of protector, and before the eyes of rulers and amidst a sea of tears, the divine rearranged his narrative. This is not merely the account of a remorseful brother. It is a testament to all who believe their errors have permanently disqualified them. Behind the life of Judah lies an untold narrative, a story commencing in anguish, traversing betrayal, and culminating with the scepter of divine promise resting in his grasp. Prepare to discover why Judah was never just one name among 12. Continue watching to unveil the hidden chronicle of Judah, the man who consigned his own kin to servitude. Leah's existence was never uncomplicated. From the moment she was given to Jacob in marriage through a ruse, she lived overshadowed by her younger sister, Rachel. Rachel was adored, admired, and intensely desired. Leah, conversely, was the wife imposed, the one Jacob had never genuinely chosen. Each day spent by Jacob's side was an amalgamation of hushed sorrow, profound pain, and persistent anticipation. She waited for a fleeting glance, a gesture of endearment, any sign that her husband perceived her as more than merely an obligation. Yet, the stark reality was that Jacob's heart was already devoted elsewhere, and it was not to her. Still, even amidst this profound rejection, God acknowledged Leah. He observed her concealed tears, her fractured spirit, her weary soul yearning for a place that never truly belonged to her. Thus, her maternal journey commenced, not fueled by unadulterated joy, but by a silent plea for recognition of her worth. Her firstborn son, she named Reuben, proclaiming, "The Lord has seen my affliction. Surely now my husband will love me." Genesis 29, verse 32. However, Jacob's affections remained unchanged. Next came her second son, whom she named Simeon, stating, "Because the Lord heard that I am hated, he hath given me this son also." The suffering persisted. Her third son, Levi, embodied the hope, "Now will my husband be joined unto me." 3 sons later, Jacob's love had still not been bestowed upon her. Leah was not regarded with the tenderness she so desperately craved. She gave her all, yet remained unseen. Then, an extraordinary event unfolded. Upon the birth of her 4th son, a profound shift occurred within Leah. Perhaps she grew weary of perpetual waiting. Perhaps she came to the realization that seeking validation in human eyes was an abyss with no bottom. Or perhaps she finally grasped that even if rejected by man, she was cherished by God. Gazing at the infant in her arms, her eyes brimming with tears, she whispered, "This time will I praise the Lord." And so she named him Judah. Genesis 29, verse 35. It was a name imbued with deep significance, Judah signifies praise. For the first time, she did not christen her child based on her husband's deficiency of love. She was no longer striving to assert her value to Jacob. Her heart, though still wounded, made the conscious choice to direct its gaze upward. She lauded God not because her life was flawless, but because she understood that He saw her. The untold story of Judah commences at this sacred juncture. Born amidst sorrow, yet named with hope. While his siblings bore appellations of despair and supplication, Judah was marked by adoration. That tiny infant had no inkling of what lay ahead. He was unaware that his name would be echoed through millennia, that monarchs would descend from his lineage, that from him, the world's hope would be born. Not even Leah foresaw that through that simple, courageous act of devotion, she was prophetically declaring the future of salvation. The biblical narrative offers sparse details of Judah's formative years, yet the household in which he matured was steeped in palpable tension. The discord within Jacob's dwelling did not dissipate. Rachel remained the favored wife. Her offspring, when born, would likewise be held in high esteem. But Judah bore a distinct appellation, and that carried significant meaning. Within the hushed confines of the tents, Leah raised him with a divided heart, still nursing her pain, yet now offering praise. The boy grew up immersed in familial strife, rivalry, and competition. Nevertheless, his name served as a perpetual reminder that something transcends suffering. Purpose. The narrative of Judah thus begins, a reflection of his mother's very soul. Rejected, yet not forgotten. Wounded, yet strengthened. Disregarded by men, yet loved by God. And among all the tribes destined to emerge from Jacob, it was the tribe of Judah that would inherit the promise of sovereignty, leadership, kingship, and redemption. Indeed, this child Judah, originating from a hidden story, born without human acclaim, was divinely chosen to initiate a lineage none could have anticipated. This illustrates that divine plans do not adhere to mortal conventions. He selects the marginalized to achieve the impossible. But who could have envisioned that this boy would become entangled in the family's most somber chapter? Jacob's household functioned simultaneously as a dwelling and an arena of emotional combat. 4 women were inextricably bound to the patriarch: Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Each, in her own manner, vied for space, attention, and above all, affection. It was an expansive, vociferous family, often marked by unspoken bitterness. Judah matured within this milieu. Even as a child, he learned that mere existence was insufficient. One had to contend to be acknowledged. His father's love was conspicuously focused on Rachel, the favored consort, the woman Jacob had perpetually adored. And even with children surrounding him, the patriarch's heart seemed to acknowledge only what emanated from her. For Leah, this constituted an enduring agony. Despite having borne Jacob 4 sons, her perceived value did not seem to increase. With each subsequent birth, perhaps she harbored hopes for a modicum of additional affection, a different regard, a change. Yet Jacob remained steadfast in his disposition, and the children sensed it. Little Judah observed when his father lingered longer in Rachel's tent. He witnessed the gestures, the covert glances, and matured with the understanding that invisible divisions permeated the household. The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, the handmaidens of Rachel and Leah, were also ensnared in this complex web. A perpetual power struggle existed between the legitimate sons and the offspring of the servants. The mothers fostered subdued rivalries. It was as if each child represented a standard, a conquest, or a threat. Judah became increasingly perceptive. From his elder brothers, he gleaned resilience. From the younger ones, he comprehended the fragility of emotions. Each family repast presented an opportunity for demonstrating leadership or a battlefield upon which jealousy could be sown. Even without full comprehension, Judah sensed he resided within an inherently unstable structure. His mother's silence often conveyed more than her words. A profound sadness resided in her eyes, yet in quiet faith also persisted. The very faith that once compelled her to praise God, even in the absence of her husband's love. It was within this setting that Judah was molded. He grew up understanding that affection is not invariably dispensed equitably, that favoritism can inflict deeper wounds than harsh pronouncements, and that occasionally blood ties are insufficient to unite brethren. Amidst this pervasive tension, a new name began to be spoken with increasing frequency within the encampment. Joseph, the son of Rachel, handsome, intelligent, and deeply cherished by Jacob. From his tender years, he received preferential treatment. His movements were guarded, his pronouncements valued. While still a mere boy, he was gifted by his father a long, multicolored robe, an emblem that communicated without uttering a word whose status was preeminent. For Judah and his brothers, this was a significant blow. It was more than just an aesthetically pleasing garment. It was a tangible symbol of preference, a definitive demarcation between him and the rest. Judah regarded Joseph with a complex mixture of apprehension and unease. He understood it was not the boy's culpability, yet he also recognized that with such a depth of unspoken hurt, it was impossible to feign indifference. The atmosphere within the household began to subtly alter. The name Judah, signifying praise, now intermingled with sentiments that were difficult to accept. His identity, forged in genuine worship, was now confronted by the harsh realities of domestic life. Even so, Judah did not distinguish himself as one prone to explosive anger. He observed. He internalized his feelings. He meticulously noted preferences, injustices, and his brother's vulnerabilities, including his own. The untold narrative of Judah continued to unfold within the quietude of his gaze and the underlying tension of every family gathering. There, he learned that survival within that particular household demanded more than mere physical fortitude. It necessitated sagacity, strategic reticence, and perhaps an element of detachment. But all was on the precipice of escalating further. And then, a new sibling entered the scene, the very one who would precipitate a profound shift. Joseph arrived like a luminous beacon, eclipsing all others. As the son of the beloved Rachel, he appeared to be the child Jacob had always envisioned. From his youth, Joseph was enveloped in an atmosphere of solicitous care and constant attention. But as he matured, it was not solely his father's affection that set him apart. It was the manner in which Jacob treated him in the presence of others. While the other sons departed for the fields at dawn, Joseph remained behind. While they toiled through the day's labor, he traversed the encampments, observing and reporting. It was as though he were under a perpetual shield. He did not need to strive for recognition. He already possessed it. Judah, now older, witnessed all of this. He had no need for extensive commentary. He simply observed the favored son. For Joseph, as he became known among his brothers, was soon to be at the epicenter of a brewing storm. This occurred when Jacob presented Joseph with a lengthy, vibrantly colored robe, distinct from any his other sons had ever possessed. That garment was more than a mere present. It was a proclamation of partiality. Within each vivid thread of the robe lay an unspoken declaration. "This is my cherished son." The atmosphere within the household deteriorated further. The brothers' gazes became clouded with envy. Every movement Joseph made was met with suspicion, and he did little to alleviate this growing unease. Joseph began recounting his dreams in which he held a position of authority over them. He dreamt of sheaves of grain bowing before his own, and subsequently of the sun, moon, and 11 stars prostrating themselves before him. Judah listened in quiet contemplation, his mind working diligently, his eyes fixed intently on Joseph. Unlike Simeon and Levi, who tended to act impulsively, Judah possessed a calculating nature. He was not driven by sudden outbursts, but by a more strategic approach. Jealousy began to proliferate amongst the brothers like unchecked weeds. With each pronouncement from Joseph, the air became increasingly acrimonious. Laughter diminished, and glances turned cold. An unspoken tension, now utterly impossible to conceal, permeated the entire household, even affecting the servants. Joseph, perhaps naive, or perhaps fully cognizant of his elevated standing, did not seem to grasp the profound depth of the hurt he was inflicting. Or if he did, he appeared indifferent. Judah, meanwhile, maintained his steady gaze. He was not the type to erupt. He was the type to meticulously plan. Jacob's household, already bearing the scars of favoritism, had now become fertile ground for an impending crisis. Judah understood the potent influence of words, and Joseph's dreams ignited something far deeper than mere wounded pride. They struck at the very core of identity, at the pervasive sense of rejection that the brothers had carried since their childhood. Within Judah's mind, memories resurfaced. His mother's sorrowful tears, his brothers toiling diligently without a single gesture of appreciation, Jacob's silence in the face of such blatant injustice. All of these elements converged with the present circumstances. Joseph's tunic had transformed into a symbol of a wound that refused to heal, a wound carried within Judah. A history of rejection had now crystallized into a bitter question. Why him and not us? The very praise that imbued his name with its profound meaning now felt distant and unreachable. The untold narrative of Judah continued its silent unfolding, shaping his character within the shadows of pervasive jealousy. His mother, Leah's unwavering faith, still resonated within his soul, but the unfolding events were progressively beginning to overshadow that spiritual melody. The atmosphere became heavy, oppressive. The brothers conversed in hushed whispers amongst themselves. Hatred smoldered like a concealed ember until the fateful day arrived. When Jacob dispatched Joseph to the fields where his brothers were tending their flocks, it was intended as a simple visit, a routine request from their father. However, between the lines of this seemingly straightforward directive, the destiny of the family was irrevocably poised to change. Joseph proceeded onward, utterly oblivious to the fact that on that particular day, he would confront the cumulative weight of years of suppressed resentment. And Judah was no longer merely an observer. What does one do with a brother who perceives himself as superior to all others? Before we proceed, we kindly request your support. Please subscribe to our channel and leave a like to assist us in reaching a wider audience with biblical narratives such as this one. Now, let us continue with the journey of Judah, the man who orchestrated the sale of his sibling and ultimately offered his own life for another. Jacob summoned Joseph and dispatched him to his brothers with what appeared to be a straightforward mission: to check on the flocks and bring back news. Yet, for Joseph, this journey would mark the commencement of his most profound ordeal, and for Judah, it represented the darkest turning point in his personal saga. As Joseph traversed the fields, he likely had no premonition of what awaited him. The distinctive robe he wore, the emblem of his father's special favor, fluttered in the breeze like a banner that blazed in his brother's eyes. Little did he know that his very presence would stir not longing, but deep-seated resentment. Judah was the first to spot him. He recognized his brother from a considerable distance by his bearing, his gait, and, of course, by the conspicuous colors of his tunic, which seemed to boldly declare, "I am the favored one." A heavy, palpable silence descended upon the brothers. When the others also perceived who was approaching, the entire atmosphere shifted dramatically. Words were exchanged with haste, words poisoned by years of simmering animosity. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them grumbled. His eyes narrowed with animosity. The pent-up rage once contained erupted like a breached dam. Dangerous thoughts surfaced with alarming speed. "Let's put him to death. We can then tell our father he was torn apart by a wild beast." It appeared to be the opportune moment, far removed from their father's watchful eye, far from the familial tents. But then, amidst the agitated discussion, Judah interjected. He did not need to raise his voice. His words were measured, firm, and possessed a logical cadence. "What is the profit we shall gain if we slay him and conceal his blood? What advantage do we derive from such an action?" The brothers fell silent for a moment. "Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. He is our brother, our own flesh and blood. Let us refrain from shedding his blood." Judah's proposal sounded like a shrewd plan. Anger momentarily yielded to expediency. The suggestion held a certain logic. They would dispose of Joseph, absolve themselves of the guilt of bloodshed, and, moreover, profit from the transaction. It is considerably easier to reconcile a guilty conscience when malevolence assumes the guise of reason. Upon Joseph's arrival, he was not greeted with embraces, but with forceful hands. He was stripped of his distinctive tunic, the very symbol of his privileged position, and cast into a dry, empty cistern. Judah observed the proceedings. He did not intervene. He displayed no pity. He simply waited. Shortly thereafter, a caravan of Ishmaelites came into view. They were merchants en route to Egypt. This presented the perfect opportunity. The brothers beckoned them over, engaged in negotiation, and sold Joseph as if he were any ordinary chattel. Nameless, without value, utterly defenseless. Judah did not hesitate. The young man was taken away, bound, without understanding the reason for his subjugation. Joseph's eyes, filled with bewilderment and fear, met Judah's for a fleeting moment. But Judah remained impassive. His gaze seemed to convey, "This action is necessary." The transaction was completed. 20 pieces of silver exchanged hands. The brother who had once slept alongside them in their tents was now mere merchandise destined for a distant marketplace. When the dust of the departing caravan finally settled, the profound weight of their actions descended upon them all, yet no one uttered a word. Only Judah appeared outwardly composed. The tunic was then deliberately stained with the blood of a goat. They would return to their encampment with a tragic yet fabricated account. Jacob would receive the garment as if it were his son's lifeless body, and would grieve as a man who had lost everything. It was a cruel deception, yet it was the meticulously crafted plan. The voice that was intended to lead with praise had instead orchestrated betrayal. The sound of footsteps receded, muffled by the dust of the road. Not a single brother spoke. The silver coins were already safely stowed away, but the true burden they carried was not financial. It resided within their hearts. Joseph's tunic, once a symbol of preferential treatment and the source of deep-seated pain, had now become the central element of a cruel fabrication. The plan had been set into motion. Now it was time for its execution. They reached their home before nightfall. Jacob was waiting, his heart filled with anticipation, eager for news from the son he had dispatched. However, instead of Joseph's cheerful voice resonating through the camp, the patriarch was met with a tense silence and a blood-soaked garment. "We found this in the field," they stated, presenting the piece of clothing as though it were an ordinary artifact. "See if it is your son's tunic." Judah remained in the periphery, observing the scene unfold. He uttered no words. He simply watched. Jacob received the tunic with trembling hands, his gaze fixed upon the crimson stains. The fabric was unmistakable. It was the very tunic he himself had bestowed upon his beloved son. His countenance turned ashen, his body weakened perceptibly. A profound, guttural groan escaped his lips. Tears erupted without warning. Jacob tore his own garments and collapsed onto the ground. "My son, my Joseph, torn to pieces, dead!" he cried, covering his head with ashes and his chest with the outward manifestations of profound grief. The entire household converged, attempting to comprehend the unfolding tragedy. The wives strove to console the patriarch, but he refused their solace. His sons, all except Joseph, approached and attempted to offer words of comfort, but no voice could penetrate the overwhelming sorrow that had enveloped Jacob. Judah observed it all in silence. He witnessed his father's spirit wither under the weight of grief, and deep within him, he understood that this agony had a name. It had a discernible cause, and it was alive somewhere in Egypt, weeping just as bitterly as the father who believed him lost. Yet Judah remained silent. Being a participant in that elaborate deception felt akin to carrying an invisible weight upon his shoulders. Every step he took within the dwelling, every searching look from Jacob, every mournful sigh from his father was like a needle piercing his conscience. The guilt was never articulated aloud, but it echoed with deafening intensity within him. It was too late to reverse their actions. Joseph's sail could not be undone. The lie that had been uttered could not be retracted. And Jacob's heart was irrevocably shattered. Days turned into weeks, and Jacob continued to reject any form of consolation. A pervasive sadness settled over the entire encampment. The once robust and active patriarch had become a mere shadow of his former self. He walked little, ate even less, and invariably returned to the tunic, clutching it as if it were a living being. Judah, who had once heard from his mother that his name signified praise to God, now fell silent, a co-conspirator in a profound act of betrayal. The untold story of Judah continued to be inscribed, not with words, but with the crushing burden of silence. The same silence that had allowed Joseph to cry out from the cistern unanswered now enveloped Jacob's home like a heavy shroud of darkness. There was no jubilation, no sense of joy. The flocks continued to be tended, the family's enterprises carried on, but the very spirit of the household had fundamentally changed. Something had been buried alongside that deceit, and it was far more than just the truth. Judah began to withdraw emotionally. He felt increasingly out of place amongst his brothers. They shared the same heavy burden, yet each carried it in a distinct manner. Some attempted to dismiss it from their minds. Others feigned a sense of normalcy. But Judah internalized it all. There were nights when he would leave the tents and gaze up at the heavens. He would recall Joseph's eyes as he was led away, Jacob's expression as he held the blood-stained tunic, the tears that Judah himself had suppressed, and he would ponder, "Will I ever find forgiveness?" But no one else knew the truth. No one except the brothers, and none of them dared to breach the pact of silence. Jacob's suffering showed no signs of abating, and with it, the weight in Judah's heart only intensified. He attempted to resume a semblance of normal living, but he knew that something within him had been irrevocably fractured on that day. A part of his very soul had remained behind in that desolate cistern. Another had shattered as he witnessed his father's anguished cries for a son who was, in fact, still alive. And so, Judah began to contemplate departing. He yearned for air to breathe. He craved distance. He desperately wished to forget. But guilt is a persistent shadow that never remains silent for long. After all that had transpired, Judah found it impossible to continue residing under the same roof. The guilt throbbed within his chest like a festering wound that refused to heal. Witnessing his father waste away in perpetual sorrow day after day, hearing Leah's silent prayers, and enduring the heavy accusatory glances of his brothers had become an unbearable burden. He needed to leave, to breathe freely away from the haunting memory of the blood-stained tunic, to escape the pervasive shadow of Joseph. And so, Judah made the decisive resolution to create distance for himself. He departed from his father's dwelling and journeyed to Adullam, a region within Canaan, situated far from the ancestral homeland and the divine assurances that had guided Abraham's descendants. There, he encountered a novel setting, a different populace, and ultimately a new companion. The daughter of a man identified as Shua became the wife of Judah. The ancient scriptures note no mention of affection or ardor in this union, merely the fact of the marriage. Perhaps his intention was to forge a fresh start, or simply to find a diversion. What he genuinely yearned for was release from the considerable weight he bore, a profound sense of guilt, a burden that time itself could not alleviate. From this union, 3 sons were born: Onan, and Shelah. The eldest son matured swiftly, and soon Judah arranged a marriage for him with Tamar, a young woman from that very region. Judah perceived in the emergence of a new generation an opportunity for reconstruction. He may have reasoned that by establishing a new family, he could leave his past behind. However, what appeared to be a fresh chapter brought a stark realization. The past cannot be vanquished by mere distance, nor does suffering simply evaporate into silence. The eldest, became corrupt. The sacred texts declare him wicked in the Lord's estimation. Consequently, God claimed his life. This loss was abrupt. Tamar found herself a widow while still in the bloom of youth. Judah's household was plunged into mourning, a sorrow not stemming from immediate wrongdoing, but one that resurrected poignant memories. Judah, adhering to the ancient law of levirate marriage, which mandated that a younger brother should father offspring in the name of his deceased sibling, gave Tamar to Onan, his second son. Yet Onan refused to honor this obligation. He would engage in intimacy with Tamar, but deliberately prevented conception, aware that any resulting child would not be recognized as his own. His self-serving conduct incurred God's displeasure, and like before him, Onan also perished. 2 sons lost, 1 daughter-in-law, twice widowed. And Judah, now advancing in years, began to be overtaken by apprehension and suspicion. He gave his word to Tamar that he would entrust her to his 3rd son, Shelah, once he reached maturity. Yet, deep within, Judah harbored no genuine intention of fulfilling this pledge. He mused to himself, "Perhaps she is the source of the trouble. Perhaps she brings ill fortune to my household." And so, in a manner akin to how he had dealt with Joseph, Judah opted for silence and avoidance. He dispatched Tamar back to her paternal home, under the guise of awaiting Shelah's growth. This was an indirect method of distancing her without resolving the underlying issue. A form of evasion masquerading as prudence. Judah's hidden narrative continued to be shaped by choices that sidestepped any direct confrontation with truth. He had fled from Jacob. Now, he evaded his obligations as a father and as a man, even amidst his own children, even as the patriarch of his household. Judah had become spiritually estranged. He no longer sought the God of his ancestors. He no longer invoked divine promises. His existence had devolved into routine, and his faith became a faint echo. The praise that had once been synonymous with his name no longer passed his lips. His days were characterized by mere survival rather than by devotion. Calamity had entered his dwelling. 2 deceased sons, an unfulfilled vow, a disregarded daughter-in-law, and a heart burdened by decisions that gradually drew him further and further from his original purpose. Judah wished to forget, but life was poised to forcefully remind him that every seed sown will, in time, germinate. Evasion offers no respite. Divine justice and silence will sooner or later be broken. The pain he inflicted, the deceit he perpetuated, and the guilt he harbored were about to collide with a woman who refused to be rendered insignificant. Tragedy was about to arrive at his doorstep. Tamar returned to her father's home, holding on to the assurance that upon Shelah's maturation, Judah would summon her to marry him. She complied, but within her heart, something fractured. There was no honor in that arrangement. The absence of sincerity was evident in Judah's gaze. He had no intention of honoring his commitment. And Tamar, though young, was not easily fooled. She understood what was transpiring. She had been cast aside, not for any fault of her own, but for the misfortunes she had endured. It was simpler for Judah to attribute the deaths of his sons to her than to confront the reality that both had been wicked, and that he himself, as their father, had perhaps failed. Tamar spent her days within the somber confines of her father's residence. The women of the village spoke in hushed tones about her predicament. A widow of 2 brothers, betrothed to a 3rd who would never materialize. Hope dissolved into dust, and with it, her dignity. Meanwhile, Judah continued with his life. His enterprises flourished, his flocks multiplied, and Shelah matured into a man. Yet no summons was ever extended to Tamar. No word, no gesture indicating that the promise would be honored. Judah preferred not to confront the matter. He had already experienced the loss of 2 sons. Deep down, he harbored the belief that Tamar was a source of misfortune, an ill omen. His faith, already distant, now concealed itself behind superstition and convenience. It was easier for him to disregard Tamar than to fulfill his obligation. But God does not overlook the forgotten, and divine justice, though silent, operates with unerring precision. Tamar, scorned and neglected, refused to let her story conclude in such a manner. She did not merely wait. She took action. She learned that Judah would be journeying to Timnah to shear his sheep. This was a period when he would be away from public scrutiny, more preoccupied with business than with caution. She divested herself of her widow's attire, veiled her face, and positioned herself by the roadside where Judah was expected to pass. Her motive was not vengeance. She sought justice. She understood that she possessed no voice, especially as a forgotten widow. But there, in disguise, she would compel Judah to acknowledge her. Even though he did not recognize her, Judah observed her. He did not identify her. He assumed she was a temple prostitute, common in that region. He approached her and made advances. Tamar, composed and resolute, requested a pledge: his signet, his cord, and his staff. 3 objects symbolizing his identity, his authority, and his path. He relinquished them. They were together. Subsequently, Judah continued his journey. He pledged to send a young goat as payment. However, when he attempted to fulfill this promise through an intermediary, the woman was nowhere to be found. And as no one knew of any such prostitute in that vicinity, Judah resolved to dismiss the entire affair. It was preferable, he reasoned, not to face embarrassment. He buried the transgression in the familiar silence he habitually employed. 3 months elapsed. Then news arrived. Tamar was with child. Judah was incensed. "Burn her," he commanded. As the head of the household, he remained accountable for her. He now believed his honor had been defiled. But Tamar did not remain silent. She sent a message to Judah, stating, "The father of the child within me is the man to whom these items belong." And she returned the signet, the cord, and the staff. Those objects, which Judah recognized instantly, served as a mirror reflecting his own actions. Everything was brought to light: his hypocrisy, his neglect, his cowardice. The woman he had attempted to obliterate revealed his truth. And then Judah uttered words that altered the trajectory of his life. "She is more righteous than I." This marked the first occasion Judah publicly acknowledged a fault. He offered no defense. He made no accusations. He did not resort to excuses. He simply conceded the truth. Tamar, the forgotten, the silenced one, became the instrument of truth. She not only exposed Judah, but compelled him to confront himself. The concealed narrative of Judah took an unexpected turn at that very moment. For the first time, his conscience had room to breathe. There was no external retribution, no intervention from the heavens. There was a confrontation, undoubtedly, but it was an internal one, a confrontation that brought pain, yet also liberation. Tamar proceeded with her life. She gave birth to twins, Perez and Zerah, and it was through the lineage of Perez that King David would eventually emerge. And from King David, the Messiah. Yes, from the scorned woman and the man who had deceived her, God would bring forth the line of salvation. For when pride is humbled and truth is embraced, redemption begins to take form. The woman he had misled would be the very one to illuminate his path to truth. Judah continued his existence as if the incident had never occurred. The encounter with the woman by the roadside whom he had mistaken for a prostitute, had been conveniently buried beneath the dust of his self-interest. Unable to locate her to deliver the promised young goat, he convinced himself it was best to forget. "I have already sent the payment," he reasoned. "I do not wish to become a spectacle." With that, he turned away from yet another brush with reality. But time, as it invariably does, held its own intricate plan. 3 months later, the news arrived with the force of a thunderclap. Tamar was pregnant. The word spread rapidly. Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, a woman twice widowed, was expecting a child. Without having married Shelah, Judah's initial reaction was one of intense fury. He rose with the authority of a judge. "Bring her forth," he declared. "Let her be consumed by flames." It was a cold, swift, and merciless sentence, but it was also a facade. Publicly condemning Tamar offered him momentary solace from confronting his own inner turmoil. After all, in the eyes of society, he remained the responsible figure, the zealous patriarch, the father safeguarding his household's honor. But Tamar would not be silenced. Before being taken away, she dispatched a message. She did not cry out. She did not implore. She simply conveyed something. The signet, the cord, and the staff. Simple objects, yet they carried profound significance of identity and authority. They belonged to Judah. They constituted irrefutable evidence that the father of the child was the very man who was now demanding her execution. Accompanying these items, she sent a clear declaration. "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child. Pray identify whose these are." The moment struck with the impact of a physical blow. Judah, before the assembled company, witnessed the truth he had striven to conceal, laid bare. There was no denying it now, no avenue of escape. Tamar, the forgotten, the rejected, the disregarded woman, now stood before him, resolute and dignified, bearing the truth in her hands. And Judah, remarkably, did not falter. For the first time in the entirety of the biblical account, he performed an act that so many men of his generation never dared. He accepted responsibility with a firm voice, perhaps tinged with shame, yet undeniably imbued with recognition. He stated, "She is more righteous than I, for I did not give her to my son, Shelah." These pronouncements transcended a mere confession. They represented a pivotal turning point. A man who had employed silence as a tool of deception now utilized truth to achieve his own liberation. Judah acknowledged not only Tamar's inherent righteousness, but also his own shortcomings, his omission, his transgression. Before everyone, he spoke no further. He offered no defense. He provided no justifications. He simply accepted ownership. And the scriptures make it unequivocally clear that from that point forward, he never again shared intimacy with Tamar. That moment signified a profound shift. Judah remained the same man who had betrayed his brother, the same who had misled his father, the same who had turned away from his faith. But now, something had begun to transform. For the first time, he regarded himself with honesty. For the first time, his conscience was not suppressed. It was heard, and it was not merely about him. It concerned Tamar, a woman who, even devoid of a voice, even when marginalized and treated as invisible, found the courage to rise with wisdom. She did not raise her voice in protest. She did not seek retribution. She did not resort to falsehood. She simply presented the truth and allowed it to speak for itself. Tamar not only secured justice for herself, but also preserved Judah's legacy. Had he persisted on the path of omission and hypocrisy, his narrative would have concluded in disgrace and ruin. However, by confronting him, she offered him an opportunity for a new beginning, and he embraced it. The untold story of Judah began to unfold from that moment of confrontation. There was no divine intervention from the heavens, no angelic appearance in a dream. It was a woman, a widow, a forgotten soul, who with fortitude and sagacity brought to light that which he most feared, the truth. And ironically, from this unplanned union, conceived in deceit, emerged twins. Tamar gave birth to 2 sons, Perez and Zerah. But it was Perez who first emerged from the womb. His name signifies breakthrough or breach, and it was he who would later be inscribed in the lineage of King David. And from David's line, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Indeed, from the union of a broken man and a rejected woman, God commenced the writing of a new chapter in his story of redemption. For this is his way. He employs weakness to manifest his strength. He utilizes confession to restore. He embraces repentance to transform. Judah was no longer the same individual. He still had a considerable journey ahead, but a new chapter had commenced, one in which he began to evolve into a man, not through power, but through humility. A nascent light had begun to dawn, yet the path of redemption remained lengthy. Time elapsed, and Tamar's pregnancy progressed. The gestation that had begun amidst scandal was now the focal point of a divine promise. That woman, once silent and forgotten, now carried within her a plan she did not fully comprehend, but one that God had meticulously orchestrated. Judah, for his part, maintained his silence. However, it was a transformed silence, no longer an accomplice to deception, but a reflection of a heart beginning to yield. When the appointed time for the birth arrived, an unexpected event transpired. Tamar commenced labor, and it was revealed that she was carrying not one child, but 2 twins. It was as if God were doubling the sign, multiplying the seed, demonstrating that even from deception, he could bring forth life. During the delivery, the individual who extended his hand first was not the one destined to be born first. Zerah reached out, and the midwife swiftly tied a scarlet thread around his wrist to signify him as the initial arrival. But then, something astonishing occurred. He withdrew his hand, and the other infant, Perez, emerged first. This was a disruption of the natural order. The one intended to arrive second burst forth prominently, and this seemingly minor detail proved prophetic. Tamar gazed at the boy who emerged with such force, almost as if tearing a path forward, and bestowed upon him the name Perez, signifying breakthrough or breach. Judah, who had remained reticent for so long, now beheld his sons, not the sons of his past, claimed by their own iniquity, but these, born from unveiled truth, from accepted justice, from humiliation transmuted into redemption. God had preserved Judah's lineage, not through his own merit, nor because of an unblemished past, for such a thing did not exist, but through his grace. Judah, the man who had sold his own brother. Judah, who had deceived his father. Judah, who had rejected his daughter-in-law. That same man now witnessed his lineage continue. And more than that, he saw his lineage acknowledged by God. The two boys would grow, and from Perez, the Bible later reveals, would come Boaz. From Boaz, Obed. From Obed, Jesse. From Jesse, David, the king after God's own heart. And from David's line would descend Jesus, the Savior of the world. It all commenced here, with a forgotten woman, a humbled man, and two infants born under extraordinary circumstances. What appeared to be a scandal was, in truth, an act of redemption. What seemed like an error became a symbol of restoration. What appeared to defy the law ultimately fulfilled a divine purpose. Judah, a man shaped until that point by human choices, was now encompassed by a divine one. He had not planned this lineage. He had not sought this outcome. But God, ever sovereign, utilized every fractured element of his life to weave together an eternal plan. The boy born to a rejected mother, the one whose name meant praise, now witnessed grace manifest before his very eyes. And although a path of reconciliation still lay ahead, the initial step had been taken, not through the strength of his own will, but through the sovereignty of the God who transforms falls into new beginnings. Tamar, for her courage, entered the narrative of faith not as a scandal, but as a symbol. A woman who, when silenced, found her voice, who, when despised, revealed justice, who, when utilized, gave birth to the next link in the promise. And Judah began to grasp that redemption is not about erasing the past, but about allowing God to author something new from it. And meanwhile, in Egypt, Joseph's story entered a new phase. Years had passed since the birth of Perez and Zerah. Judah's life seemed to have found a new rhythm, but the past could not be forgotten. The scars of betraying Joseph, deceiving Jacob, and facing Tamar's justice remained. Though the demands of routine occupied him, memory served as a constant reminder that not all debts are settled by the passage of time. Some necessitate a return to the origin. It was in this context that famine descended. The land of Canaan withered. Crops ceased to grow. Herds began to perish. Scarcity infiltrated the tents like a shadow. And Jacob, now aged and frail, gathered his sons and declared, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go there and procure sustenance so that we may not perish." This marked the first time in many years that Judah and his brothers would embark on a mission together. They were no longer merely shepherds. They were now the heads of their own households, grown men, yet they carried a shared history that, though never explicitly discussed, bound them through unspoken bonds of silence and guilt. 10 brothers departed. Benjamin remained behind with Jacob. The father could not bear the thought of losing him as well. He had already lost Joseph, or so he believed, and Benjamin represented the most precious connection to Rachel's memory. Thus he stayed, and Judah, exhibiting greater experience and maturity, accompanied the others. They arrived in Egypt, an unfamiliar land brimming with wealth and structured by stringent regulations, operating under the authority of a powerful individual, second only to Pharaoh. This man, who communicated through interpreters, observed their every move with discerning eyes. His countenance was unknown to them, but to him, the faces prostrating before him were familiar acquaintances. Joseph recognized them instantly. His brothers, the very ones who had sold him, who had torn him from his youth, handed him over as a slave, and plunged their father into profound sorrow. But he did not reveal his identity. Not yet. A specific purpose resided in his heart, and a wound remained unhealed. Judah did not recognize him, nor did the others. That Egyptian figure bore no resemblance to the brother they had once abandoned to an Ishmaelite caravan. However, something about the man unsettled them. He accused them of being spies. He inquired about their family. He sought to ascertain if they had additional brothers. And when they mentioned Benjamin, his demeanor grew stern. "Bring this youngest brother to prove you are not fabricating falsehoods." They returned to Canaan with sacks of grain and a clear directive. If they desired further provisions, they would be compelled to bring Benjamin. Jacob resisted. Fear held him captive, but hunger spoke with greater urgency. It was at this juncture that Judah, exhibiting a transformed disposition, stepped forward. He was no longer the man who had remained silent while his father collapsed in grief. Now he stood firm and declared, "I shall be your surety for him. If I do not bring him back to you, I shall bear the blame before you eternally." This was a critical moment. Reuben had also offered his own sons as a guarantee, but Jacob had refused. When Judah spoke, there was a distinct quality in his voice and resonance that emanated not solely from his lips, but from his very being. A man transformed by repentance, a man prepared to embrace a burden rather than flee from it. The hidden narrative of Judah was re-emerging at the heart of the story, not as the betrayer, but as the responsible party. The man who had once proposed a plan that fractured the family was now offering a pathway to its salvation. Jacob reluctantly acquiesced. They prepared gifts, provisions, and set out once more, this time accompanied by Benjamin. And with him came the palpable tension. Judah's heart pounded with increased intensity. He understood that their fate hung in the balance, but he also recognized that his own integrity was being tested, not by the hands of the ruler, but by the hands of God. Upon their arrival in Egypt once more, they were escorted to Joseph's residence. The governor received them with a feast. He observed Benjamin and was overcome with emotion, yet he maintained his concealed identity. They rejoiced, momentarily believing the worst had passed, but they were mistaken. The true ordeal still awaited them. The provisions were dwindling. The grain brought from Egypt was no longer sufficient. The mouths in Jacob's household had multiplied, but the supplies were diminishing. Hunger returned, more potent, more pressing, and with it, the dilemma Jacob had sought to evade. The powerful man in Egypt had been unequivocal. "Do not return without your youngest brother." But for Jacob, that demand was akin to reliving profound grief. Having already lost Joseph, the prospect of sending Benjamin was tantamount to surrendering his heart for a second time. Rachel, his beloved, was gone. Benjamin was the sole remaining vestige of her. To send him would be to sever his last tangible connection to her. This was the last vestige of a love that could never be replaced. The brothers sensed it, which is why they found it so difficult to speak. Yet their hunger was overwhelming. Lives hung precariously in the balance. It was in that moment that Judah stepped forward. He did not speak with the detached calculations he had employed before, nor with the hesitant apprehension of one avoiding a clash. His words emerged from a place of deep sorrow, from someone who had endured too much loss to continue concealing the truth. "If you do not permit Benjamin to travel with us, we will not return." He recalled the decree. "You shall not behold my face again unless your youngest brother is present." Judah's voice sliced through the tense atmosphere, firm yet imbued with a newfound quality: accountability. Jacob faltered. His anguish was palpable. Every mention of Benjamin felt like a fresh stab. But Judah remained resolute, pressing onward with words that marked a critical juncture in his personal journey. "I shall be answerable for him. From my person, you may reclaim him. Should I fail to bring him back to you and present him before you, I shall bear the guilt for my entire life." This was more than a mere promise. It was a solemn pledge. The man who, years prior, had proposed selling a sibling now volunteered as surety for another. The same individual who had concealed himself while his father grieved now vowed to find no rest until his father's joy was restored. Observing the conviction in Judah's demeanor, perhaps sensing a genuine shift within him, Jacob relented. With profound sadness in his eyes, he sanctioned their departure. He dispatched them with valuable provisions for the Egyptian dignitary: healing balms, sweet honey, fragrant spices, and twice the amount of silver, all that held significant value amongst them. Benjamin departed with his brethren. Their journey was marked by an oppressive silence. The familiar terrain felt heavy with apprehension, but Judah's resolve did not waver. He understood that his word was at stake, and with it, the lives of all his kin. Upon their arrival, an unforeseen turn of events occurred. They were ushered into the residence of the governor. A sense of dread washed over them, fearing a trap. They anticipated an arrest, particularly concerning the silver coins that had inexplicably reappeared in their provisions. Instead, they were greeted with a lavish banquet. Joseph received them with unexpected kindness. He still concealed his identity, yet his gaze lingered on Benjamin with particular intensity. The sight of his youngest brother stirred his emotions profoundly, compelling him to retreat from the room to weep in private. After composing himself and cleansing his face, he rejoined them. During the feast, the brothers were seated according to their birth order, a meticulous detail that left them astonished. When the meal was served, Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than that of the others. Judah observed this, and it triggered a flood of memories. Years ago, such overt favoritism had fueled their envy and precipitated the family's downfall. Now, witnessing the youngest brother singled out once more, he paused, anticipating the group's reaction. However, nothing transpired. There was no hint of jealousy, no whispered discontent. It was as if they were all acutely aware of their past failings and the urgent necessity to rectify their present conduct. Judah remained vigilant. No longer driven by impulsiveness or convenience, he bore his newfound sense of responsibility like a protective shield, his primary objective being Benjamin's safe return. He was prepared to undertake any measure necessary to ensure it. Yet, he remained unaware that their ultimate trial lay just ahead, that his pledge would be tested by fire, and that the divine architect of redemptive narratives does not conclude chapters without first scrutinizing the heart. The banquet concluded, and their sacks were replenished with grain. The brothers made ready to depart. Perhaps a sense of relief began to settle, but a carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold. A plan designed to ascertain whether Judah's transformation was genuine or merely a facade. After all, making a promise is effortless. Upholding it demands sacrifice. He had given his word. But would he keep it? The sky was still cloaked in darkness as Jacob's sons commenced their journey homeward. Their provisions were secured, and Benjamin was among them. At last, an atmosphere of relief permeated the group. It seemed as though all issues had been resolved. However, unbeknownst to them, a final test had been prepared, a trial destined to unearth ancient specters and reveal the true extent of their metamorphosis. Shortly after their departure, the formidable Egyptian official, whose true identity remained concealed, summoned his attendant. He issued precise directives. Replenish their sacks with provisions as before, but this time, conceal my silver goblet within the youngest one's bag. The snare was set. The caravan had barely exited the city limits when the distant sound of approaching horses echoed in the air. It was a messenger from the governor, his countenance stern, his voice resonating with accusation. "Why have you repaid goodness with malevolence? My master's silver goblet is missing. It is used for divination and is highly prized." The brothers were struck with shock and indignation. They vehemently denied any wrongdoing, their protests filled with unwavering conviction. One of them, absolutely certain of their innocence, declared, "If any among us is found with the cup, let that person perish, and the remainder of us shall become your bond servants." The attendant, however, adopted a more measured approach. "Whoever is discovered with the cup will become my servant, and the rest of you shall be released." Each man dismounted. One by one, they unfastened their sacks. Judah's heart pounded, not with suspicion, but with sheer dread. They could not afford to lose Benjamin. Not now. Not after all that had been pledged. The search proceeded from the eldest brother to the youngest. And then, within Benjamin's sack, it lay, the silver goblet. The silence shattered into cries of profound anguish. The men, in their despair, tore their garments. Tragedy had descended upon them with the force of an avalanche. They had made a commitment. Judah had given his word. And now, the youngest, his father's cherished son, was condemned to servitude. Without a moment's hesitation, they hastened back to the palace, their hope now resting on negotiation and earnest pleas. They prostrated themselves before the governor, unaware that their knees were touching the ground before the very brother they had once betrayed. Joseph observed them intently, his eyes scanning every flicker of expression. Fear, shame, desperation. It was as if their entire past stood before him, replayed in every gesture. One of the brothers attempted an explanation, suggesting that God had exposed their hidden transgressions, perhaps not concerning the cup, but a deep-seated guilt, an ancient betrayal that had remained unconfessed. They offered themselves collectively as slaves. But Joseph responded, "Heaven forbid that I should punish the innocent. The man in whose possession the cup is found shall remain here. The rest of you may depart in peace." At that, Judah stepped forward. The man who had once counseled the sale of Joseph now advanced to the epicenter of the crisis. His voice, steady yet laden with emotion, began to speak. He spoke of their aged father, how the loss of another son would shatter him with grief. He recounted the profound bond between Jacob and Benjamin, the enduring sorrow that had never faded since Joseph's disappearance. Finally, he declared, "Permit me to remain in the young man's stead. Allow him to return to his brothers. I shall stay as your servant." It was the same individual, yet his heart had undergone a profound transformation. Judah no longer sought refuge behind others or devised stratagems to evade the predicament. Instead, he embraced the pain, the guilt, and the inherent risk. For the first time, he was willing to bear the cost that love demands. A heavy silence ensued. Joseph gazed at him, and within him, the wounded brother confronted something utterly unexpected. True transformation. The one who had wronged him was now making an earnest effort to save him. Judah stood his ground in that pivotal moment, a moment that held the potential to rewrite his narrative, a story that had commenced with deception, but now bowed before the profound grace of redemption. Judah stood in that moment, a moment that held the potential to rewrite his narrative. The grand hall of the palace was as hushed as a tomb. The weight of the impending decision hung palpably in the air. The silver goblet had indeed been discovered in Benjamin's sack, the youngest, the most beloved, the final son of Rachel. The verdict seemed irrevocably sealed. He was to remain a slave in Egypt. However, something had shifted, not in the gaze of the enigmatic governor, but within the very soul of one man, Judah. It was impossible not to cast one's mind back to the past. Years prior, in the presence of another favored brother, Judah had prioritized personal gain. He had proposed selling Joseph, convincing the others that murder would be gratuitous. Now, in a strikingly similar circumstance, Judah drew a deep breath, not to mask his guilt, but to confront it head-on. With deliberate steps, he approached the elevated seat of authority. No longer proud, no longer detached, his countenance bore the indelible marks of time, of profound responsibility, and of pain endured and guilt suppressed for so many years. As he opened his mouth, his voice no longer echoed the cunning of a shrewd negotiator, but resonated with the lament of a broken heart. "My lord," he pleaded, "pray allow your servant to speak. Listen to these words with patience. We are numerous brothers. We have an elderly father who has already lost one son. Benjamin is all that remains to him from the woman he cherished deeply. If we return home without him, our father will not survive. He will succumb to grief." Each utterance struck like a hammer blow upon the hearts of the listening brothers. Yet Judah did not falter. "I gave my solemn word concerning him. I told my father, if I do not bring him back, I shall bear the burden of blame for the remainder of my days." He paused momentarily, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, but he did not avert his gaze. "Therefore I implore you, permit me to remain in the boy's place. Allow him to return with his brethren. Let him go back to our father's embrace. But I," he declared, his voice firming with resolve, "I shall remain here as your slave eternally." An absolute silence descended. No one dared to breathe. Not a single sound emanated from the other brothers. That moment transcended a mere supplication. It was a profound act of surrender. Judah was not speaking merely to absolve himself of guilt. He was offering himself out of genuine love. Love for his father, love for his brother, and perhaps the profound kind of love that blossoms only in the heart of one who has been profoundly reshaped by suffering. It was almost unbelievable that this was the same man, the one who had distanced himself from his family, who had plunged into reckless decisions, who had deceived, who had remained silent, who had fled. Now he had returned, not as the identical individual, but as someone who had learned, who had stumbled and risen, who had once deceived, but now spoke truth with his entire being. Joseph's gaze remained fixed upon him. No words had yet been uttered, but a discernible shift was occurring. The silence deepened, as if time itself had momentarily suspended its passage. Judah remained standing, awaiting, not adulation, not reward, but simply awaiting justice, even if it meant sacrificing his own freedom. And within Joseph's soul, in that very instant, an overwhelming torrent of emotion erupted. The anguish of the past, the abandonment in the pit, the long years of servitude, the forgotten days in confinement, all seemed to dissolve in the image of a penitent brother now presenting himself as a voluntary sacrifice. Judah, the name bestowed by his mother amidst sorrow, signifying praise, now finally resonated with its intended meaning. For only one who truly comprehends grace can offer genuine praise. Only one who acknowledges their wrongdoing can willingly offer themselves in another's stead. It was as if all the disparate elements were finally aligning into a coherent whole. God's intricate plan, despite numerous human missteps, was unfolding with flawless precision. The man who had once sold his brother was now prepared to relinquish himself for another. And that was the undeniable sign that transformation was not merely superficial, but profound. Judah was unaware of it, but his courageous act would not only secure Benjamin's freedom, but would also redeem the memory of Joseph, and so much more. It would pave the way for the ultimate fulfillment of a promise destined to alter the very trajectory of human history. For the God of Judah does not select the faultless. He transforms those who are willing. "Now I comprehend," he mused, "why his name is Judah." Judah's words continued to reverberate within the charged silence of the Egyptian palace. His brothers stood frozen, their bodies rigid with apprehension. The governor of Egypt, that imposing and enigmatic figure, had just heard one of the most courageous and deeply sorrowful declarations one could possibly utter. Judah, the very individual who had sold his brother into slavery years before, was now offering his own life in exchange for Benjamin's liberty. Joseph remained unmoving for what felt like an immeasurable span of time. His eyes were glistening with tears. The accumulated weight of forgotten dreams, of wounds that had only partially healed, rested heavily upon his shoulders. The pain of abandonment, the gnawing emptiness of servitude, the stark injustice of his imprisonment, all of it acquired a profound new significance in that singular moment. He could no longer contain his emotions. With a voice trembling and a heart ablaze, he commanded all the Egyptians to depart from the chamber. The guards, the interpreters, the servants, all exited with haste, taken aback by the sudden surge of emotional outpouring. Only he and his brothers remained, men marked by poor decisions, acts of betrayal, and silences that inflicted deeper wounds than any spoken word. But now, this was the moment for truth. Joseph began to weep, not a quiet, suppressed sob, but a loud, unrestrained outpouring, akin to the cries of a child reunited with his mother. After a period of intense fear, his lamentations were so profound that they echoed through the palace corridors. Even the Egyptians, at a considerable distance, could hear them. And then he spoke, addressing them directly in Hebrew, without the need for an interpreter. "I am Joseph, your brother." Time seemed to halt. The brothers froze, the blood in their veins turning to ice. The seemingly impossible stood before them. The brother they had discarded like an object, whom they had sold as a slave, was now the second most powerful man in Egypt. Joseph stepped forward. "I am Joseph, the brother you sold. But do not be distressed. Do not be afraid, nor should you blame yourselves for what you did. It was God who sent me before you to preserve life." Joseph's words were not an expression of vengeance, but of profound healing. He perceived, through the lens of faith, that every instance of suffering had been deliberately shaped by God into a grander design. He did not diminish the reality of their suffering, but he saw beyond it a divine purpose. The brothers remained uncertain how to respond. Shame mingled with fear, but Joseph drew nearer. He embraced Benjamin first, and the two brothers wept openly on each other's shoulders. Then, one by one, he embraced his remaining brothers. There were no accusations, no demands, only embraces filled with an abundance of grace and reconciliation. And in that very moment, Judah, the one who most desperately needed that embrace, allowed himself to weep freely. He knew the gravity of his past actions. He understood the immense burden he had carried. But in that embrace, he felt an overwhelming sense of forgiveness. Not merely his brother's forgiveness, but the forgiveness of God himself. This marked the commencement of a new chapter. Joseph then instructed them to return to Canaan, to bring their father, and to relocate their entire family to Egypt. There, they would reside under his direct protection and partake in the finest provisions the land offered. He, the one who had been abandoned, would now become their benefactor. The obscured narrative of Judah, the man who had betrayed his own brother, was now undergoing a remarkable transformation before the eyes of the world. The individual who had fallen so low was now assuming a pivotal role in a divine restoration. It was no longer a matter of guilt, but of grace. No longer about the past, but about the future. The reconciliation between the brothers did not erase their transgressions, but it redeemed what had once seemed utterly irredeemable. It was as if God himself, through Joseph, was declaring, "Even that which was intended for evil, I can transform for good." Judah remained silent, but his heart rejoiced. He had offered himself and had been graciously accepted. He had risked everything out of love for his brother and had found forgiveness. The man who had once walked towards darkness now stood bathed in a light so brilliant it overshadowed everything else. The story that had begun with a blood-stained tunic was now being rewritten with tears of earnest repentance, sincere embraces, and the promise of a redemptive future. Yet, a further blessing was still to unfold. Something even more significant was drawing near. Time had elapsed since Joseph had revealed his true identity to his brothers in Egypt. Jacob's family now resided in Goshen, a fertile region graciously granted by Pharaoh. The famine that ravaged the land did not touch them, as they were under Joseph's protective care. Jacob, now elderly and sensing his end was approaching, summoned his sons to bestow his final blessings upon them. He gathered them around his bedside and began to speak, not merely words of farewell, but prophetic pronouncements concerning the future of each individual. When it came time for Judah, Jacob gazed deeply into his son's eyes. The same son who had once proposed selling Joseph now stood before him, visibly transformed. Jacob saw not merely his child, but the man he had become. "Judah," he proclaimed, "your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall rest upon the necks of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you." These pronouncements carried immense power. Though not the firstborn, Judah would indeed receive honor and leadership. Jacob continued, "Judah is a lion cub. From the spoil, my son, you have ascended. He crouches, he lies down like a lion, and like a lioness, who dares to rouse him?" The imagery of the lion symbolized strength, courage, and inherent royalty. But the prophecy with the most profound implications was yet to come. "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and to him shall be the obedience of the nations." These words held immense prophetic significance. The scepter, a symbol of authority and dominion, would remain with Judah until the arrival of the one to whom it truly belonged, a clear allusion to the Messiah who would descend from Judah's lineage. Jacob proceeded. "He ties his donkey to the vine, his colt to the choicest branch, He washes his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. This description painted a vivid picture of abundance, prosperity, and purity. Yet it also hinted at sacrifice, blood, and ultimately, redemption. Judah listened in rapt silence, his heart overflowing with emotion. He recalled his past mistakes and failures, but also his profound transformation. And now, he received a promise that far surpassed his comprehension. After bestowing his blessings upon all his sons, Jacob issued instructions for his burial, and then peacefully passed away. He was interred in the cave of Machpelah, alongside his esteemed ancestors. The obscured narrative of Judah, marked by its dramatic highs and lows, culminated in an everlasting promise. From his lineage would emerge the Messiah, the Savior, the one destined to bring redemption not only to Israel, but to all the nations of the world. The hidden story of Judah draws to a close, but his influence endures through the passage of centuries. When we examine Judah's life, we do not encounter a hero from the outset. On the contrary, what we witness is an ordinary man, deeply flawed, who committed grievous errors. He was a brother who suggested selling Joseph, a son who participated in a deception that shattered his father's heart, and a man who sought refuge far from his family through choices that distanced him from God. Yet, it was this very man whom God chose to bear something eternal. Judah's narrative does not conclude in Egypt, nor within the confines of Jacob's tomb. It spans the millennia. Within the sacred pages of the New Testament, his name reappears, and this time it is placed in a position of profound honor. Right at the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, when presenting the genealogy of Jesus, the text declares, "Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar." There he is, not concealed, not erased, but highlighted. Judah, with all his mistakes, all his scars, his entire story interwoven into the lineage of the Son of God. It is as if God himself is stating, "I do not erase stories. I redeem them." The hidden story of Judah, the one that commenced with rejection and envy, that journeyed through guilt and deception, ultimately concludes with honor. Judah was not perfect, but he was undeniably transformed. He did not begin auspiciously, but he concluded his earthly journey in glory. God meticulously shaped him, chapter by chapter, until his life became a living testament to redemption. And then, in the final book of the Bible, Revelation, that promised descendant, the one who holds the eternal scepter, is finally revealed. Not as a tender infant in Bethlehem, but as a triumphant king. The text powerfully declares, "Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed." Indeed, Jesus, the Son of God, is referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Not from Joseph's tribe, not from the lineage of those sons who appeared more righteous or spiritually inclined, but from the line of Judah, the man who faltered, repented, and was fundamentally transformed. This offers us a precious lesson. God does not choose the strongest, nor the most intelligent, nor the purest. God selects those who are willing to be shaped, those who confront their failures and allow Him to rewrite their stories, those who recognize their inherent inadequacy but understand that in His hands they can become instruments of eternal purpose. Grace possesses a power far exceeding that of the past. The hidden story of Judah, in truth, reflects our own. Who among us has never failed? Who has not carried guilt, remained silent, or made shameful choices? But the same grace that reached Judah is accessible to us today. The same voice that forgave, embraced, and restored in Egypt still speaks to our hearts. And herein lies an invitation. What portion of your narrative remains concealed? Which segment of your history do you believe is beyond divine influence? Present it. Bring it into the open. For when we entrust our shortcomings to the Creator, He repurposes them into powerful accounts. He inscribes verses of divine favor where once there was disgrace. He elevates rulers from those who have acknowledged their transgressions. The veiled account of Judah demonstrates that no soul is outside the embrace of compassion. If the Almighty sovereignly employed this individual's existence, stained by deception, ruin, and suffering, to usher in the Messiah, He can similarly utilize your experiences to shape the destinies of others. May the mighty pronouncements of the Lion from the lineage of Judah resonate within your spirit. May you come to realize that your path, much like Judah's, need not be defined by defeat, but by ultimate deliverance. Should this account resonate with you, explore additional presentations highlighting significant figures from Scripture. Select one, join our community by subscribing, and express your appreciation with a like. May the divine continue to reveal to us His capacity to reshape even those who have stumbled profoundly, mirroring His work in Judah's life.